Okay, hold on a sec. Let's see. Just gonna fix this real quick. How come I can't make it go? Oh, here it is.
Yeah, right there.
Welcome to Pej's Recovery Corner. My name is Pej, and today I have a special guest. His name is Garrett Braukman. Welcome, Garrett. Welcome to the corner.
Hey, what's going on?
Good to see you here today. I've been we talked about getting you on here a while back. You're a good man. I've met you before. I've come out to your facility, but I want to hear your background. I want to hear your what it was like, what happened, and obviously what it's like now. So for some reason, you're blurry right now.
Yeah, trying to figure that out.
Do you think it's your internet?
There
you go. Perfect. All right. So tell us about yourself, Garrett. Where you grew up, your childhood, all that, and what all happened.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. Right outside of Cincinnati, there's a town called Westchester. That's where I grew up. It's about halfway between Dayton and Cincinnati. Geography too well of that area.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with two alcoholic, drug addict parents.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of fighting, a lot of dysfunction. I remember the first sleepover I had with a friend being like, "Oh, your parents don't fight all the time. That's not normal." That was a weird thing for me. I didn't expect that to be something that happens. I just thought it was normal. And my dad was pretty big in the .com boom. And then that crash happened in the late 90s. And so he lost a bunch of money and tried to keep up and just was constantly struggling financially and fiscally. And my mom was working, but my parents were both very alcoholics that worked jobs that kept face, but would just get hammered at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so growing up in that environment, I quickly kind of realized how things work in the alcoholism spectrum of things.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 13, I think is when everything kind of started to really change. My father committed suicide due to kind of substance abuse issues, financial issues, a bunch of stuff. But committed suicide, and then a year later, my uncle, who had 10 years sober, it was a year and 4 days later. This was September 13th, and then a year later, in September 17th, the next year, was when my uncle actually relapsed and died from an overdose.
Wow.
So very quickly, I kind of realized the scope of addiction and what can happen, and just kind of saw that. And then from there on, I started I briefly picked up straight edge because I was in the punk scene, and I found this music that was aggressive and angry, and I was aggressive and angry, and I loved it. I loved the values that were in punk music and the values that were in the hardcore scene. And these people became family for me in that time. So I was probably around 15 at this point. And
that was still in Ohio, right?
Yeah. And during that time, I really I was in a band. I did a bunch of cool stuff with music, and I just felt like those people got me. Those people were my family. If I didn't have $20 to go to a show, I would get in for free. They were basically if I wasn't at a show, people would text me and be like, "Where were you? Why weren't you at the show?" And at that time, this was early 2000s, that scene was really explosive in the Midwest. So it was kind of the huge thing to do, was you go to shows. And so I started to find alcohol. My mom was in and out of treatment during that time.
Did you have any siblings at that time?
So I'm basically the only child from my parents' marriage, but I have two brothers from my mom's first marriage and a brother from my dad's first marriage. So my parents met, it was both their second marriages. It's a little confusing. But I have three brothers, and we basically have different families all together. But they're all pretty close with me even now. And yeah, I mean, my brothers were a huge influence on music for me. They were also my brother. So my brother David at that time moved from Australia. He was living in Australia where his dad was. And when he heard that my father died and that my mom was kind of a mess, he kind of was like, I'm going to be the only male figure that's going to help this kid. So my brother came back and we lived together with my mom, who was in and out of treatment. So it was a little touch and go when she was there. And we started kind of, I think that male figure bonding was the only time that was a really good thing for me, because it was the only time I really had like a normal person that could, take me, like we would just go to diners and talk late at night and read philosophy and do things. One of the first tattoo I ever got actually was saying my brother always said this: without struggle, there is no progression. And navigating being a teenager and being in the Midwest and all these things that, are just awkward as they are. And you add alcoholism and family addiction and all of that. And in this perfect Midwest town where everyone knows everything about you. And, it just kind of exploded. So I started to party a little bit. It quickly got out of control. I remember being 16 and waking up to pants soaked in piss because I, drank a little too much, pissed myself in my sleep, and, just shit that was awful. And quickly I realized, like, I remember I took a Xanax once and like woke up with some like naked girl in my face. And I was like, this is cool, but like, I don't know how I got here. This is a weird thing. Like, and I never really liked that part of it. And then I started kind of recreationally taking Adderall and stuff that uppers. And I didn't like weed. I never liked weed. It wasn't a thing for me. I'm always sleepy and tired and hungry. So those kind of things that make that more of a thing kind of bums me out. Like, I'm really not a fan of that. And then I kind of bounced around. I would go on like little tours and stuff with bands. It wasn't anything glamorous. It was like a short bus or something that my friends bought from some guy for like $2,000, and we'd go on tour. I always tell people like, oh, I went on tour. And then I'm like, it was like a little school bus. Like, we were kind of just making ends meet. And then I kind of was back and forth from, I have family in Florida. So I'd go to Florida. I was always trying to get out of where I was because I thought that if I change my place, which I later found in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's a very standard alcoholic thing, is like geographic changes. I was like, oh, cool, I'll just move to Florida. It's fine. And then that quickly got out of control. And a buddy of mine there was like, hey, I know this guy who sells cocaine. And I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. And that was like the immediate start of downfall. Where
and how old were you during that time?
I was like 17, 17 around that. And then that was when things really started to quickly fall apart. Didn't have a lot of money.
Were you not in school during this time at all?
Yeah. So I dropped out my junior year. Because part of it was like my mom was in and out of rehab, and then like we kind of just like, I don't know, I just stopped caring. And this isn't on my brothers, but I had 2 out of 3 brothers that like didn't graduate, and I thought they were fine. They weren't at the time, but like to me, I was like, well, you don't really need this. And I also felt, and I still feel like, to me, high school was I'm a very intellectual person. And so I'm like reading like Voltaire and like crazy, like psychology and, crazy philosophy stuff that I'm like in these classes that just don't make any sense. So I was kind of just bored. So I dropped out. Well, I didn't technically drop out till my senior year, but I just kind of stopped going. Um, and they kind of just accepted that. And I moved to Florida for a bit. And then when I moved to Florida, that was when cocaine became like a really big piece of my life. I liked that because it was like, oh, cool. Cocaine's a drug to me where I could pseudo kind of control it, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Where like to me, there's this shift of like, oh well, if I have to go see a family member, I can just like put it away for a few hours,
Mhm.
and then I'll be fine. Like even to this day, I feel like I don't like not having some sort of control. That's just like a thing I have
You
where like,
don't say. You
yeah,
know.
yeah. It's just like I can't like even when friends go like to this day, if we're like go like the other few months ago we were going to Palm Springs for a weekend trip and I was like, no, I'd rather like have my car. Like we can go with friends, but like I just like it's like a security thing for me where like I need
Oh,
to
I get
have
that.
my
I
things.
get that. Yeah.
Um, so for me, that was like I could just kind of shut it off for a minute and then go back and do it at like 9 o'clock.
Mhm.
So it was like, oh, cool. If I need to see family and save face or like go do a show or whatever. And for a while there, I was just like doing merch and stuff, like selling T-shirts at a booth and thinking I was really cool. It was kind of just like I hadn't showered in a week and really was borderline homeless. Uh, and then from there, I kind of just started to really think about getting sober. My story is interesting because I did get sober at a young age and I only partied for a few years.
Okay.
And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that I watched my mom go through treatment. I watched my dad die and I watched my uncle die. And I knew from that point that like I was not gonna make it. Like this was not in the cards for me. Um, it just was going to be impossible for me to actually live and function and be a part of the drinking and drugging world.
So
And I was going to
how
go on
old
this.
were you when you
I
got
was
sober?
18, border of 17, 18 was kind of when I was going to go on this tour. And then they were like, you're loaded. And no, um, you're taking money and you're just kind of crazy. And so I kind of, and my mom was out here. So my mom originally is from Southern California. My mom was born and raised in Orange. She went to El Medina High School, close to Orange
Mhm.
there. So my mom was out here. My grandma's out here. And she was out here in Salvation Army because my grandma kind of told her like, hey, the treatment funds are up. So we've sent you all these nice rehabs. And this was pre-insurance covering rehab. This was like
Right.
the days of like, it's 10 grand, pull the second mortgage out, we'll
Cash
figure it
pay. It
out.
was
Like,
cash pay
yeah,
treatment. Yes.
like you don't do
Like
this.
people would put up their house to be able to put their kid in treatment.
Yeah. And so, at the time, my mom was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but she had to get out of the Salvation Army around that time. And she said, I'm going to get an apartment and you can figure it out with me. And I'm going to meetings. So if you want to go to meetings, here's an option. And my grandma kind of told me, like, hey, the treatment funds are dry. So um, we devised a plan. And I went to Orange County, and there's a family center in Tustin, and
Mhm.
there's like a I think it's technically like a women's center, but they do like families as well.
Right.
Um, and they had an intern therapist that just I had seen a lot of therapists in my teenage years with my mom, and that was a whole thing. But this lady was just she was good at what she did, and I just told her like, I don't know what I want to do, but right now I'm going to be sober just to get my family off my back and kind of figure it out. um, and we started going through the trauma. And I remember the first session I had with her, I told her kind of my background. My dad died, this and that. And she goes, I just want you to know that you're basically telling me all these traumatic events like you just went to Disneyland yesterday. so what we're going to do is break down those events and talk about them. And I did not want to do that, which was not fun, but I started to do it. And, I kind of was like, I was very ambivalent, but I was like, hey, you know what? I'll try it for a little bit. I had no true intentions of actually staying sober, which is the funniest part about it, given my situation now. I kind of was just like, yeah, I don't really have friends here, so I guess this is cool. And I was going to enroll in school there. And then they were like, well, you have no credits, so you'd have to like go to a secondary school. And that's not really good in California. So you should probably just get your GED, go to college. So I got my GED and I had like 3 months sober at that time. And that was really good for me because at the time, I think it really helped me know that I was smart, because I felt like I wasn't smart at all. And I was like, I'm not going to pass this thing. To this day, like I hate math. Like I'm not a math person. And I passed the GED somehow. And then I remember I was going to go to college, and I was like, well, I wanted to go to hair school because I was like 4 months sober, and I thought that would be really cool to meet girls. Because a straight guy at hair school would be really
Doing
awesome.
hair? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was like, this would be great. And then my family was like, you're insane, no. And then they were basically like, hey, you can go to community college, or you can go to this like drug and alcohol counseling program. That's what you want to do. Because I always was good at talking to people, and like one of my favorite things about being in a band was like people talking to me about lyrics I wrote or something I did, and like how like those bands that changed our lives, and things like that. So I was like, well, I like talking to people, so yeah, I could probably do that. And so I went to a school for drug and alcohol counseling, and I was like, yeah, this is cool. I get to learn about drugs all day. Like worst case scenario, I get to learn about drugs all day.
During this time, had you already kind of made a decision? I mean, you were young, right? You were like 18 years old, right? During this time?
Yeah.
Had you already made a decision, like, I'm not going backwards anymore, I'm just going to stay sober? Like, was this an absolute decision, or you were kind of still on the fence?
No, I was on the fence. I was on the fence probably until year one. And then about, I would say I finished schooling, and then I interned at a place that is now called Northbound. Back in the day, when it was National Therapeutic Services, it was a way smaller program.
I remember
a lot of different people there.
That's right, NTS they called it.
Yeah, and I interned there, and then I entered this weird like relationship with somebody back in Florida, and decided I would go back to Florida for a little bit. And that was when I kind of committed to sobriety at this point, but I definitely manipulated that situation to be like, yeah, this is really toxic and wrong. But there was like a crazy girl, it was a crazy situation. And I moved in like the height of like the recession reeling. And like, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna move to Florida and get a job. And that didn't really happen. And then we broke up. And so my mom was actually 2 years sober at that time, and we did an actual parent thing, and basically was like, hey, you made a decision, you can't really come back here, so figure it out. And so I had to go to Ohio again for 2 years and figure out what I was going to do.
And this is your early 20s?
Yeah. And I started
back
DJing
in Ohio.
Yeah. And I started DJing because I started to kind of get into that world too. Back in that time, a lot of the hardcore kids, especially in Southern California, you'd go to a show and then you'd kind of end up at a rave or something. And
so what were you DJing? Was it house music? Was it techno? I mean, you went from punk music to DJing.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And at first it was house music, and then I kind of just opened my I started DJing in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati is very hip hop oriented place. So I kind of started playing top 40 and stuff like that, and started playing at all these bars, and that became kind of a thing. And I started to kind of do that as a job, which was really cool because my rent was like $400. So I was like, cool, I can make that in one night of like DJing a club.
Hell yeah.
So I did that, and I did it for a while, and it was really fun. As a sober person, I definitely I went to meetings out there. I went to meetings in Florida, and I did the best I could with like when situations arise where I was like, all right, this is getting a little weird. I just get out of there. But yeah, it wasn't all awful. And then an opportunity presented itself where I was like, well, I can go back to California, um, and kind of rebuild my life there. And with the counseling thing, like once you get your KDAC, you can't really do it. You can't move out of California for like until you do like 8,000 hours or something.
Right.
So I was like, well, I guess I'll just like go into that. And I went back to Northbound at the time and just said, hey, remember me? Well, that's cool. I'd like a job here. That'd be cool. And I didn't have like my full KDAC yet. So they were like, yeah, we'll make you a TAC. And I made not a lot of money and just did my job there.
And lived down in
Worked really
Orange County
hard.
during that time?
Yeah. And my
How old were
mom's
you?
job, I was 21 at that time. My mom's job at the time was she was a property manager. That's like her trade. So like
Mhm.
she got a free apartment to like, that's how we were able to like do that. Was she was like,
Wow.
well, I have this extra bedroom because I have and she had like this apartment in Huntington Beach. So it was like a 2-bedroom close to the water. So like, yeah, cool. I'll do that. And then I just started really thinking about getting into this field, into the field of addiction recovery. I thought, I've always kind of lived this alternative viewpoint in sobriety where it's like people are kind of like, well, as a DJ, people are like, well, you go near a barber, you're going to get your hair cut. And I was like, well, no, I'm doing a job. Like, and I always felt like I felt different than, and this is such a standard thing to say, but it's like, I felt like that this was pre all the new young people getting sober and stuff, where our
Mhm.
industry was mostly older people. And I
Right.
was like, there really isn't a voice of like young people that are fun, that like don't just like go to meetings and go home every day. Like that doesn't seem like living to me. And
Right.
God bless you if that's what you do, but like I just don't feel like that's not going to be awesome for my sobriety.
Right.
And I started kind of developing I became a counselor there, and started developing my skills and started like working on my life and getting my stuff in order. I was DJing with a few friends here in LA, on the weekends, and just kind of like doing that for fun, but not like a full-time gig. And I got to DJ a bunch of cool parties, which was awesome. Um, and
Mm.
stay sober during it. And I got to meet some idols of mine and some people that like even before I moved, I was able to actually meet like DJ AM, who's a big influence in my life of sobriety, even if he relapsed. Um, you know, being able to DJ and be as successful as he was in open format, and kind of does the same thing I do, and being able to kind of see that world from the lens of someone who's sober was really cool.
I love
I
that.
don't know. I
Love
mean,
it.
I think for me, it was always about, I'm always like at that point, especially when I got a year, it was like about almost like proving people like this almost punk rock mentality of like, you don't think I'm going to stay sober? Well, fuck you. I'll stay sober in spite of
Yeah.
you. Like,
Yep.
and
Right.
yeah, this is like, it became more of like you know what? I need to do this because this is going to make my life better. And I,
Mhm.
worked with a sponsor, did the steps. I did what I need to. And, I also like, I don't believe in any gods, which was very odd, especially at the time. Things have
Mhm.
definitely changed in the last 12 years since I got sober. But,
Yeah.
I was going to meetings and being like, I don't know about all this, man. I'm not into the God stuff. And like,
Were you the
thankfully
atheist?
I
Were
had
you the atheist in the corner?
yep, 100%. And just sitting there being like, I don't know about that. I'm just kind of, I don't think I'm sober because of God. I think I'm sober because I made a better decision for my life and did some therapy. And I had a lot of traumatic situations that occurred in my life, and I worked on those and did better and grew from those experiences. Um, and that's kind of where I saw myself, going. And I always think of, I'm going to mess up the quote, but this guy, Henry Rollins, he's one of my idols.
Love him.
I'd love to meet him one day. But he always says, like, you think it's something about, there's some famous quote from him that's about, if you want to make your parents, you want to get mad at your parents, like, don't wrap your car around a tree because you're drunk driving, like outlast them, do everything different from them if you're really that person. And that's kind of where I see myself, like growing up in this very conservative, Midwest life, and being different throughout that whole experience, and being the weird kid, the emo kid, and like the punk rock kid, and living that kind of lifestyle. I kind of just always was like, well, no, I'm gonna outwit, I'm gonna outlast this whole thing. Like, it is vital for me to do this because every stereotype about my life is that I'm gonna die stranded on the street, drunk, pissing myself, being that person. And so every day I wake up and I don't do that, I'm defying the logics of society. I pay rent now. Weird things like that. Like, it's an odd life to live when you get sober. Because I feel like, if I didn't, it would not be fun. Nothing would go right. And I kind of stuck in the program because people said, try it for a year. And if your life doesn't get better, go do what you're going to do. And so that was kind of my goal. And then my life got better in a year. And I was like, well, it's kind of cool. I mean, I don't have to worry about wasting money. I don't have to worry about waking up and not knowing where I am. I don't have to, figure out the awful things I did and the horrible person I was. Mm-hmm. That was a big piece of it for me. My life got better.
This is awesome. So many things I'd love to say. For one, I want you to know something, Garrett. When you talk, I listen like I'm enthralled. I really, I learn a lot from you, and I love that you talked on so many different points. I relate to so much of it. The trauma, definitely the trauma. Obviously you had some death in your family, and you had people that weren't exactly. They were parents. They were trying to be the parents that they could be to the best of their ability. But obviously, when there's addiction involved, what do we have to learn from? So the fact that you were so young and made this decision, like I need to change my life, and then within probably a few years, or maybe just a year and a half, or whatever you were mentioning, you decided, like, I'm just going to do this thing. Because you as a youngster, I mean, being 21 and being driven to go to school and like do well and become a drug and alcohol counselor and actually like work in the field of addiction. For a lot of people, this field it's challenging. Like, a lot of people will come into it and get burnt out almost immediately. But you not only came in and did, counseling and everything that you were doing, you also had a therapist before that was helping you, and then you learned how to help somebody else. I love that. You also talked about DJing and kids having fun. And I remember like way back in the 80s when I was growing up in LA, I was in my 20s. The rave scene was huge. It was huge. Like, that's just what we did. And they had Plur, and it was just like a place where people could do drugs, but they could also express their love, not just for each other, but for the music. It was like a culture. Yeah. And that culture's gone on and on for decades now. But I remember when I was probably 6 or 7 years sober, my sister was working for Insomniac, and I used to know Pasquale from way back in the day. And a friend of mine had approached me about starting an actual thing for young people where we could have a tent and possibly ask them to provide a space for us where it could be like a sober tent. So we started putting the word out there. Let's get people that have at least a year of sobriety, that love the music, that are still in love with the music, to be able to come and be a part of this thing. It's called the Insomniac Consciousness Group. And sure enough, it began 7 to 8 years ago, and it's just gone on and on throughout a lot of music festivals where kids don't have to constantly do it, as you say, just like go to meetings and then come home and do nothing with their lives. They actually can be involved and enjoy the music and do it sober. do it sober. It's
Yeah.
really cool. Like that particular tent, they put a bunch of candy out on the table, and they'll have meetings in the back, and they don't call them Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. When they're having the meeting, they will identify as like Pej, grateful music lover, sober music lover. That's how they sort of identify themselves. And then people can just talk, and then they go out on the dance floors, or they go walk around and just people watch and shit like that. So I think
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Now, one thing that's truly amazing about, I mean, how old are you right now?
30.
30 years old. Truly amazing is the fact that you ended up not just working in the field, but owning a place. You have
Yeah.
I'll talk about that a little bit, like how that even happened.
So I was working for a place in Malibu. I was running this outpatient, and I basically the kind of how it transpired was I was going to move up to LA because a lot of my friends were up here. The people I started hanging out with were up here, and then I got an offer to run this outpatient. And then I would say a year after that, somebody basically that company was selling to a corporate conglomerate, and I did not enjoy corporate conglomerate treatment. People that are a part of that's awesome, but working in it was very difficult at the time. The company no longer exists because of the corporate structure of that place. So,
Right.
not going to say who it is, but yeah. And I was going to start this plan with one of the guys I was working with. We kind of off hours, we're meeting up and planning like, well, we should make this thing a reality. And then we both kind of didn't want to. I don't come from money, so that was really difficult for me. And he didn't want to put in a bunch of money. And then one of our friends said, "Oh, these people want to buy this name off of you." So we met with them, and then I was like, "Oh, you guys really don't know what you're doing. So why don't you just work with me and we can figure this out?" And that's kind of how it transpired, and it's been an awesome deal. And we started in 2015, and we're still going 6 years
So you were
later. And
25 years old when you opened up your own center,
yeah,
and it's a
I never
detox,
told anyone
right?
how old I
Detox.
was. At the time, it was an outpatient. We closed the
Okay.
outpatient in 2017 or 18, because it just wasn't the world kind of shifted. But we had opened the detox, so that had changed.
Right.
But that was, yeah, I mean, this is a big part of my life now, is doing this work. And it's an amazing thing. And I just kind of always wanted to push the level up and do everything I can to get to the next level. And another Henry Rollins thing I always think of is that, I don't have talent, I have tenacity. That's one of my favorite quotes, is like, as talented as I may be, or as someone may be, it's also like, you tell me to do something, I'll do it. Like you don't think I can do it. Well, I'll make sure that you see that I am doing it.
Watch this. Right. Right.
Yeah, like I'm very much that person. And that really transpired. And I think my sobriety was always about getting over adversity. So being young and running a program and doing all these things were like, I'm going to do this because I have to, because it's what makes me feel better about my life. It's what makes me enjoy life. Sitting here years later, realizing that I have my own program that I control and that I run and operate on a daily basis is awesome.
It is
This is
awesome.
my dream.
It is awesome. And to think that you had parents that were caught up in addiction and alcoholism, and the fact that you yourself got caught up in it for a bit, but at such a young age, you just full circle, just turned it around. It is totally
Yeah,
fucking awesome. I think it's amazing that you, and the fact that you didn't even really come from money, or, I mean, even like educationally, I mean, it's amazing how some
yeah,
of us will become drug and alcohol counselors, but take it to the next level and the next level. Because I know when I was doing like case management, I thought, this is cool. It pays me better than my get well job, but I'm not going to be able to live comfortably off of this. Like, I got to take it to the
right,
next level and do some other shit. So I went into like interventions and things like that, to where it made
right.
sense.
I was always thinking about what comes next and how do I get to that point of like feeling comfortable in my life, and where do I, kind of wiggle around. And no, I mean, that was something like, as much as my mother and I have a great relationship today, and something I've learned in her life was like, being a single parent, there were times where she would give me her last 20 and she wouldn't tell me. And I know now that value, and that she did do that. And so I always kind of committed to like, I'm not going to live like that. Like, I can't fathom the idea of living paycheck to paycheck, or, you know, trying to make something work where I'm making $15 an hour because I have a GED,
Yeah.
and I end up getting my bachelor's degree, and I'm eventually going to go back for I was working on my master's, and then I kind of stopped for a minute because student loans are a little rough, and then I'm going to go back and do that again.
You're an inspiration. I have. You already know. I mean, I have a bunch of places down in Orange County that are sober livings, and I get a lot of youngsters that come through that are in their late teens, early 20s, or even mid 20s, or even late 20s. But I often tell them, like, I know people. When I talk about people I know, it's people like you. I know people that are driven, that come into this path of recovery, and they obviously they stay sober. They surrender to the process of staying sober, and then they go out and they move mountains. They do a lot of shit because
Yeah.
they have that. I mean, yeah, growing up, a lot of people say you have a lot of potential, but like, truth be told, like, we do have a lot of fucking potential. So addicts and
Yeah.
alcoholics are some of the most talented people when you actually take away the trauma and the addiction and all the different things that come with it, and get to know their real inner core, like who they are deep down inside and what their abilities are. And so I often tell, I hope some of them are watching this. I'm sure they will. But this is great, to see your process from such a young age, getting sober and staying sober. And now look at you, 12 years sober. And it's not just about owning a treatment center and all that. It's about leveling up. Like you were saying, like, I love that you're seeing what's next for Garrett. Like, what am I going to do next? And on top of that, I believe that you are comfortable in your skin. Like, you really live
Yeah.
a good life. You're a good dude.
Yeah. And I think, especially, like, even I've been in a relationship for 6 years now, 7 years, and like, just even that transpiring as a normal, healthy human being, rather than living this life of, you know, just going back and forth and kind of, not really investing yourself into a human being, and all of that. It's so hard, to live that way. And I lived that way sober for a while too. That was part of my story that I kind of drifted over, but like, not fun when you're like not loaded and want to try to like be like player, and do all that stuff because you hurt people. And it's not, I have not lived a perfect sober life. It's not just like, got sober, life is great. It has been
Right.
hard, and there have been things we go through, and it's not an easy route, but it certainly is worth it. Like, I've watched a lot of friends just go back into addiction again. And to me, that's just not an option, because I know I will end up on Skid Row. I will die. I will end up just losing every single thing I love. Um, and that's just not possible for me now. Like, I think that's why I've never really had the relapse trigger, in my head, is kind of like, that's not possible for you. The cards
It's
just
not
aren't
an
there.
option. It's just not an option
Yeah.
anymore.
Like, I can't possibly be that person, because I'd let down so many people in my life, including my own career.
Mhm.
Uh, so for me, it's like, being sober allows me to be the partner I always wished I was, the person I always wished I was, the friend I always wished I was, like, being there for people when they need me, not saying no to, people that, need help. And, working through all the things that have given me sobriety. I have a unique situation to me where, like, meetings are a piece of it, but it's not all of it. And I think a big piece of my sobriety is being able to, like, be there for the ones I love and the people around me. And every day, those are the reminders of life is good. Being able to look out and go, well, I live in a nice place. I have a cool life. It's not bad. Uh, I can just kind of like show, like I can kind of go to work when I need to. Like we were talking before the show, like today I was like, I had 2 meetings that were all digital and I was kind of like, I just going to stay home today. That's cool. I get the ability to do that because I'm sober today. And it's maybe not directly because I got sober, but indirectly, that's why people trust me to do that. And why I trust myself to do that.
One last question. I wanted to ask you this. Obviously, because you're a young man and you get people that either whether they come through your center or you just interact with them because they're coming back to recovery or they've been in and out. Obviously, we see this fentanyl craze. We see a lot of people overdosing and some of them go into coma. Some of them almost die. Some of them actually die and get revived and get brought back. What do you, as Garrett, say to somebody in that type of situation? Like, do you have any kind of way that you talk to them? Like, what do you say?
I think for me that whole thing is I don't know, it's just such a gamble. Like even cocaine and all of that. I mean, I just saw something about cocaine laced fentanyl is all over LA right now or something, and it's like,
Yeah.
man, it's such a Russian roulette. Like I don't, I've had friends that have relapsed in situations like that, and I when I do talk to them, I think the thing is like a lot of people love you, and a lot of people would be sad if you died, and even if it's something where you're thinking you can control it, it's a big gamble because no one knows what, especially in this world of like drugs that aren't opiates are filled with fentanyl now.
Right.
I don't think I could even touch that stuff even if I was using drugs. That's so scary
Right.
to not know. I think testing kits are super. If you're gonna, I go from a harm reduction model because I do think part of that does work. Where it's like, hey, if you're gonna do something, like test it, make sure you're safe. Like, don't be, don't just take your dealer's word for it. And I prefer you to get sober, and it's not worth dying over.
Right.
You're not proving anything to anyone by going into a grave. It's not going to be good. And watching people die that way, especially at a young age, it's like, I think that's a big piece of why I think the way I think is that, my dad necessarily, didn't die in the best terms. And there were a lot of weird situations involved in it where it's kind of
Right.
like, when I die, I want people to remember all the things in my legacy of being able to help people and being there for others and being a part of people's lives. And I don't know, maybe it's morbid, but I think about that a lot, where it's kind of like, this is the one, to me, especially as someone who doesn't believe in a God, is like, there is a 0.0001% chance of me being in existence on this earth. So I have to make the best of the time here. And by using some kind of drug that could kill me, could make that time so much shorter. And I'm here for such a short time that, I want to make sure my life is lived to the fullest. And I think that's what I tell other people. It's kind of, you can live this life, and it doesn't have to be, it's not all that bad to be sober. I don't know. I've lived it for a while now, and it's pretty nice.
Yeah.
I don't wake up with a hangover, which is really cool. I don't wake up feeling like shit. I don't regret things I did the night before as much. It's not as bad. And I think people have this fear of like, if you get sober, your life's this painful existence and you have to deal with yourself and all this. And yeah, it's a little shitty sometimes, but you get through it. And, without that struggle, there isn't progression. There isn't a change. So I think that's a big piece of it.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on today. Love talking with you. I hope to catch up with you soon in person, and it's always good to hear from you.
Anytime. Thank you
Thanks,
so
Garrett.
much.
Have a good one.
You too.